Welcome back to the Ego Actus reading series, Dramatic Voices. I'm Laura, and welcome to episode 4. Today I have a new pairing of director and playwright for the next show on our list, Keepers, which goes live Sunday, March 3rd. If I could have my playwright and director say a quick hello, Lawrence and Joan.
Hello.
Hi, Laura.
Welcome aboard, folks. It's a pleasure to have you. I am very excited to start off the conversation, and hopefully, both of you are excited to give your perspectives on working on this show and being part of the series. I say let's just dive right on in. And Lawrence, I think I'm going to ask you, as our playwright, what brought you into the world of theater? And specifically, what brought you into the world of playwriting or writing in general?
Well, how much time do you have? Because it's a very long and convoluted story. I actually got started as a, a kind of a rocket scientist, if you will, way back when I finished high school and went off to college. I started studying in the space program. And my first job out of college was working in the space program in the US. I eventually moved back to Canada, where I grew up, to work in the Canadian space program, but always had an interest in the theater ever since I was a little boy. I remember my parents taking me to see shows in Montreal, where I grew up. I can still remember the very first play that I saw was a touring production of Hello Dolly with Pearl Bailey, and she was just absolutely mesmerizing. And so I was hooked. I was just hooked by the theater bug, even though I pursued a career in the space program instead. And then one day, about 15 years ago or so, I was talking with a fellow here in Ottawa, where I live now, who was the artistic director of a local theater company. They had just launched their new theater season, and we were having a chat about, the plays they were putting on. And I had to confess to him that I was not completely impressed with his selection of plays. I thought
Hmm.
they were kind of old and dull. You know, I think he was operating under the same sort of constraints that exist today in post-COVID theater world of wanting to put on shows that were known to be popular and therefore would sell seats to audience members, as opposed to taking a risk on something new. I get that. I don't know that I got it at the time when I was complaining to him about all these old shows that everybody has seen a million times. And he basically said to me, "Oh, yeah, can you do something better?" So I took that as a challenge. And I said, "I think I can." And I wrote my first play and he produced it. And it went on to tour elsewhere and so on and so forth. And then someone else asked me to write a play, and someone else asked me to write a play after that. And well, here we are these many, many years later with a brand new play that I'm looking forward to sharing with Joan and all the folks who are going to come see it on March the 3rd.
I love it. It just goes to show that you could be in a totally different industry and one, be completely inspired by theater, and also two, that a challenge is always going to be a challenge and that you will want to respond to it. I love it. I think you're one of
Well,
the
I'll
first
just,
folks there that comes from a different industry to theater.
I will say that I see strong parallels in both of these parts of my life, though.
Mm.
Uh, both being in the space program and being in theater are really doing the same kind of thing, which is exploring the universe, trying to understand the nature of our world. And on the one hand, that may mean taking a magnifying glass to moon rocks or something. But on the other hand, it can also mean taking a magnifying glass to the nature of human relationships and why people like each other or don't like each other, why they argue with each other or why they Why can't we all just get along? Those sorts of questions. They're really the same thing at the end of the day.
I love it. I think you're the first person to ever make that kind of comparison, and it makes sense. Ask my brother. He loves the theater. He's teaching physics. He would not be able to make that kind of comparison whatsoever. So I think that's a really wonderful answer. It's very insightful, and hopefully that gives some level of inspiration to our listeners. You never know. Could be someone in a
Well,
different
let's
industry.
let's get your brother to listen to the podcast.
I'll get him on a call and I'll send him the link. But Joan, you and I work together a whole lot. I 99% already know the story, but for our listeners, why don't you give us the story of how you came into theater and how you came into directing? And tell us about Ego Actus a little bit.
Okay. Well, yes, we've worked a bunch together, Laura, and it's so good to be back here talking with you again. I started in theater at the High School Performing Arts. Before that, I was actually acting at Brooklyn College. They had a children's program, and I would act and do, shows and with fairy tales and such. And I really loved it. Kind of bit me, the bug of acting. And then I auditioned for the High School Performing Arts, and I was accepted. So I spent 4 years in acting, um, as a high school student. And then I graduated, I went to the neighborhood playhouse and then went straight out into off Broadway and worked as an actor in off Broadway. Um, and then I was in a class at Ensemble Studio Theater, and I was studying with Kirk Dempster. And he looked at me and he said, "You're a good actor, but you're a better director." At that point, I hadn't been directing. He said, "You see the whole play, you see the whole story. You're not just associated or tuning into your own character. I think you should really try directing." So I did, and I fell in love. I love directing. I love storytelling. That's a big part of it. I love to tell stories. I like to tell stories that are diverse, that people who normally their stories wouldn't be told, and people whose stories would be told. So it's and I'm also like not just into the well-made play. I also like to devise theater. I like to write myself. I write my own plays. I've written an autobiographical play called Almost 13, which I've toured around as a one-woman show where I play 10 different characters. But how I started Ego Actus was um, I was directing mostly, and I was at the La Mamba Umbria directing symposium in Italy. And Ellen Stewart, who is no longer with us, but she was a force in off Broadway. She's amazing inspiration and a mentor to many people. And she was there, and this was way before she passed. And she was there, and she said to me, I was not feeling, I wasn't getting really accepted in jobs that I was interviewing for. So she looked at me and she said, "Why don't you open your own door and walk through it?" Because that's what Ellen did. She started her own theater company. So that was in 2009. So in 2009, I started Ego Actus at the bequest of Ellen Stewart. At the, she requested, said, "Do it." So I did. And since then, Bruce, who's my partner in life and in theater,
Mhm.
we have produced over 50 shows, 24 standalone plays, and about, I want to say 39 plays in festivals throughout the world. Our whole thing is that theater and art doesn't need any explanation. It just needs to be here, and we're going to do it. And that's what we've been doing. So as I said, we've been working to produce this reading series because it's after COVID, and we wanted to get people in a room to look at the art, to look at the plays wherever they're at, and have an audience, invite an audience in to hear these incredible stories. We have 8 different playwrights that we're producing readings of their plays. And I read Lawrence's play and I'm like, wow, this really needs to be out there. It really needs to be developed and looked at and an audience needs to be part of this developmental process. So I'm excited about the 3rd of March, because that's only what, 5 days from now. And
Hmm.
yeah, and to put Lawrence's play Keepers, it's called, in front of an audience, and to get some feedback from our audience.
That's great. I love that we have the outside in perspective from someone like Lawrence, and we have the inside to really inside in perspective from you, Joan, when it comes to theater. And it just goes to show that, art, theater, that kind of passion, whether it's writing, directing, acting, it can come from anyone. And for any of our listeners, that shouldn't stop you. If you feel like you're in a different industry, if you feel like you're not ready, the best thing to do is take that plunge. Connect yourself with people who have the same passions, or talk to someone who will challenge you and say, no, you can't do it. So then out of spite, you'll say, yes, I will. Who knows? Maybe you could write a play. But I do have another question, and this time we're going to go right back to you, Lawrence. We're going to look specifically into the playwriting process, and I would love to know what it was like writing this show, and if you did have any kind of main inspirations.
Right. Well, before I answer that question, the former rocket scientist in me does want to jump in and say that I've done a little bit of higher mathematics here. And Joan, if Ego Actus started in 2009, that means you're celebrating your 15th anniversary now. So happy anniversary.
Oh, Joe.
Thank you, Lawrence.
We'll
Oh,
celebrate
happy
on March the
anniversary.
3rd. But to get back to your question, Laura, uh, I, like Joan, love the fact that I am a storyteller, and that is at heart what I am doing as a playwright. I think it's been true for every play I've written over the years that I just had a story in my head that I wanted to share. Uh, and I think different creators have different approaches to how they tell their stories. For myself, first of all, I need to decide whether this particular story is a theatrical story. Is it something that is best shared in the context of a theatrical space with an audience that can
Hmm.
react to it in real time, live, as opposed to on a screen, or live as opposed to being read in a book? That kind of other alternative forms of storytelling.
Hmm.
And in this instance, uh, the story has been percolating in my head for a number of years because it really is an opportunity for me and through the director and the actors for the audience to reflect on the nature of our society today. The central conceit of the play, if I can just jump into what the play is about,
Of
the
course.
central conceit of the play is the question of what if we did discover that there was a genetic basis for homosexuality? What if there really was a gay gene? Now, as a matter of fact, I don't think there is a gay gene, and there's certainly not a single gay gene, but let's pretend that's what theater is all about, right? If there were such a discovery made, what would the impact be on our society? How would people respond to that? And I just found myself thinking that there were all sorts of really quite funny and ludicrous ways that people might respond to it. Um, for example, there is in the United States today, literally today in the news these days, a very large portion of the population that is vehemently against the concept of abortion for any number of reasons. It occurred to me that some of these individuals, many of whom also have strong views against homosexuality, might then be persuaded to reconsider their opposition to abortion. Because if they knew, if they were a woman carrying a child in their womb, for example, and they discovered that that child was in fact going to be a gay man when he grew up, maybe they would reconsider whether they wanted to carry that child and raise that child afterwards. So I thought, I'm going to write a very dark comedy that is completely unbelievable in our world. Only I just look at the newspaper every day. Well, I look at my screen every day, not a real paper. And I see that the imaginary world of my play is not all that far different from the world that I see on my screen and that we see
Yeah.
in the news. So that was the genesis of the idea. And then I needed to come up with interesting characters through whom I could tell the story. And this always happens when I write a play. The characters get away from me because they're just such interesting people. I fall in love with all of them. And they have their own ideas about how they want to live their lives. And so one of the challenges I find as a playwright is how do I keep tabs on the story I thought I was going to tell while also respecting the perspectives of these characters whose story it also is. And in this particular instance, with this particular script, I've come upon a couple of particularly thorny issues that I'm trying to work my way through as to how to resolve the story. And this is why I am so excited about having the reading on March the 3rd, because it will be an opportunity for me to hear the play and get a sense through Joan as director and through the actors of who these characters are and what they really think about the world that they inhabit. And then to hear back from the audience as to what they think of how far the story is being told to them. And the feedback that I get from the director, from the actors, from the audience will help me as I go into the next stage of creation and revise the script and come up with, I hope, solutions to the problems that I see in the script as it stands today.
Good answer. What good insights. I kept making mental notes of everything you were saying because it's, you're absolutely right. I imagine that it's so surreal to be writing this kind of show, right? And thinking, oh, this is a make-believe show, a make-believe kind of situation. And then you look at the news, right? Maybe you look at it digitally or you look at it in your typical newspaper, but you still read it and you still wonder to yourself, my God, is it really that far off then? But that's what's important about theater. It's taking these kinds of situations that maybe we don't see in real life often, or maybe we do see a lot, and expressing it in a way where theater goers can kind of sit down, get that response, maybe make that connection. On the other hand, I also find it surreal, maybe in the funnier sense, how when you're working on this kind of project, the characters seem to take the play and run with it. So I imagine it's a bit of a challenge and also a level of excitement to look through this play in every single stage it's been in. And I'm really hopeful that for March 3rd, you get that kind of feedback that you're looking for and can continue building up the show into the place that you really want it to be. Uh, Joan, similar question to you, but more on the directing side. Mainly talking about the process, but the process of looking over this play, right? You mentioned that you read it and you said, wow, we've got to get this out there. What was it like getting from the idea of we got to put this on to actually preparing for it? And if you've learned something new while preparing for this show for March 3rd.
Well, one of the things that when I read it, I was also reading it with the whole lens of what's happening with the abortion rights or the lack of abortion rights and reproductive rights in our, in the US today. So I think that Lawrence is tackling that question, and he's tackling it from the point of view of the gay community. And I haven't seen that yet. I haven't seen that in any other play. And I think it gives it a really fresh um, way of looking at it. Um, and I'm just really excited to see what the audience has to say. And Lawrence has done some rewrites on it already, and it's been really it's a fine thing being a director. You can't hover too much. You got to let the playwright have their space, and you got to let them create their, like he said, his characters run away with themselves. and and they start to talk to you, and they start to become alive and have points of view, and you got to let that happen. That's part of the process, because if you don't let that happen, then you're going to get this really stilted play, and this play that's very, what I call stiff and cardboard like. So it's a matter of really like stepping, and stepping, just how do you step and how much do you step, and giving space to the creative process. One of the things that I love to do is include an audience, because I think if you're going to have theater, it's not just about the director and the playwright and the actors. The other element is the audience. And
Hmm.
I'm really looking forward to hearing what the audience is going to, their reactions, what they're going to say, what they're going to feel, how they're going to interpret, and what story they're walking away with. So that's kind of my process when I'm working with a playwright, in terms of developing a play. If the play is already written, I have a whole other process. I also like to walk away with, or when I'm looking at a play, I look at the question of the play. What's the question of this play? And the question of the play is, if there was a gay gene, for me, if there was a gay gene, would that change, somebody who is an anti-abortionist, anti-reproductive rights person? Would it change their thinking? Would it change their belief system? I mean, that's a question for me in this play. And that's what I'm looking at here. I also believe that plays have this way, and so does literature in general. Like I look at Jules Verne's, and he 100,000 Leagues Under the
Yep.
Sea, and they can predict our society. I think theater has a pulse on society, unlike other arts, because you are talking about characters, and you're talking about characters in these situations. So I think it's a way of really the public, or us as a species, working out these really questions that we have, these dilemmas that we need to get a hold of. And I think theater is a beautiful way of doing that.
Well said. You actually brought up, well, both of you throughout this interview mentioned the importance of the audience. And Joan, you're absolutely right. It's not just the playwright, the director, the actors, the folks who create. It's the folks who witness the creation and leave it with their own thoughts. And what are they going to say about that? So my final question to both of you, right? Let this be a conversation if you would like, is what do you hope the audience gets from it? Lawrence, you started off a little bit talking about the expectations. So if you would feel free to start us off, I would love to hear your thoughts about it. But Joan, of course, if a thought comes in your way, I will absolutely want to hear it.
Well, what I was speaking about before was maybe a little bit just my own purely selfish desire for what I wanted to get out of the audience. Um, and that is to help me with the problems I see in the script. That being said, though, I very much love this concept that we've been talking about of the audience being a full-fledged partner in the theatrical enterprise. The audience is very much part of the show. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about why write a play as opposed to other kinds of art. If you have a story to tell, I think it is live performing arts, whether it be plays or dance, music, where the audience's response, whether it's intellectual or gut feeling or heartfelt is very much part of the performance. And it sounds like Joan and I are on the same wavelength here, that we'll both be very much attuned to seeing what that response from the audience is going to be when they hear this play. And certainly when I've been a member of an audience, I feel that too. I go back to that very first
Mhm.
play I saw as a little boy and being absolutely mesmerized by Pearl Bailey belting out her songs as in Hello Dolly. And the reason it was mesmerizing was she was an amazing performer who knew how to connect with the audience with a compelling story. So, what do I think the audience is going to take away? In a way, I think that's unpredictable. It depends on what they come into the room with. But if they are at all attuned to what they're seeing in the news these days, I think they will respond both in their heads and in their hearts to what they are witnessing as the characters share their stories on the stage. What do you think, Joan?
Well, I can kind of answer that by talking about ego actus. One of the tenets of our company is to present plays that help audiences to ask questions about how we can make our world a better place for all beings. So I think that the audience is going to walk away and say, oh, this is something we need to be aware of. Science has taken over our lives, whether it's technology, whether it's genetics, whatever. I mean, when I was a little girl, we didn't have the technology and the science that we have right now, and it's really ruling our lives. Um, it's ruling our lives in very good ways. Like I just had two hip operations, and they were uh they were focused by robots, you know? It
Yeah.
was like the technology really helped it to, help the operation along. And and what I want to do is I want to discover that. I want to ask those questions about how is science contributing to our world? How are we using science to make our world better? And I think people are going to walk away from this play asking that question. They're going to examine it. Like, is this a good idea that we know all these genetics?
Hmm.
Is that a good idea? Will all gay people be, uh, eradicated because of it? If we have this extreme right, whoever they may be, taking over the world. I mean, there's so many possibilities in this world, but I want those questions to be asked that we need to be asking. We need to say, it's not just enough to have the science. What are we doing with it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say this. Out of with all of the episodes that we've had so far, the answer always remains fairly the same between playwrights and directors. You hope to have a response from your audience. What you don't want is an audience that just sits there, watches the show, and then leaves without too much of a thought. You want to tell a story. That's what storytelling is, right? You create something for the world to see, and you hope that they make a connection, right? Or it's such a strong emotional response that they have to talk about it. So I really do applaud you both for taking on this kind of story and and sharing it to us, which one more time, listeners, it's March 3rd, coming very, very soon. Tickets are free, but Joan, I'm sure that donations are always appreciated. Perfect.
Yes,
She's
they are.
nodding her head.
Yes, they are, definitely. We don't get any federal support from our federal government or a state or a city government, but we do get a lot of, not a lot, but some private donations. Also afterwards, we're going to have a talk back. And at the talk back, it's a guided talk back, and this is when the audience can really give their contribution and their reactions to Lawrence's play. And it's a really comfortable place at the Episcopal Actors Guild. Nice chairs, nice atmosphere. People are loving and caring and supportive of each other there. And we've had 3 plays already read, and it's been a really good experience. So I know this is going to be really quite wonderful.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Go to egoactus.com, that's EGOACTUS.com for more information, not just on this show, but on the whole reading series. Once again, Joan Lawrence, thank you very much and good luck on March 3rd.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks so much.